going to have
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Sy Barry.
Hi, how you doing? Good to see you.
Oh, it's a great honor to speak with you.
Nice to know I have fans in Brazil.
Greetings from Brazil.
Yeah.
I grew up reading your work on the Phantom. And it's
Really?
a great joy to me to be able to ask you some questions on behalf of Brazilian fans.
Well, it's very enjoyable for me to be seeing you and talking to you.
Here in Brazil, Phantom fans love your artwork.
I appreciate that.
And have you had any contact with Brazil? Do you came from Brazil in any time?
I know. I believe there was a club going on. There wasn't a Phantom Club or a big book club, but something like that. Is there a group that's dedicated to the Phantom that you're aware of?
Yes. I am part of a team of Fantasma Brasil, a group of fans that make blog and Facebook accounts and a channel in YouTube. I make you a few questions. I'm sorry by my English. My
Sure.
English is not good because I have little chance to practice the conversation. I read much in English, but conversation is very few times.
You're doing very well. I'm following everything you're saying.
Oh.
So don't worry about it.
Oh, great.
Really, out perfectly.
I will begin with a question of Roberto Sabino from the team Fantasma Brasil. And he asked how you started working with the Phantom.
Well, it's a bit of a story. It seemed at the time back in '61, I submitted a strip idea to King Features, and it had to do with post-Civil War, our Civil War, and it's kind of a takeoff on Scarlett O'Hara, and it's kind of a continuation after the Civil War, the Reconstruction period, and how most of the people after the war wanted a new life and they went out west. And I was going to have this character, her name was going to be Summer Storm, and she had a friend, his name was Jim Hawks, and he was an explorer and a tracker as well, and he did scouting for the army, for the federal army, and so this story was pretty exciting. We had I worked on it with another guy. His name was Frank Giacoya. We worked on the story and the artwork together, and we submitted it. And having introduced our script there, we were fresh on their minds, and they were considering it when Wilson McCoy became ill, and he had some kind of a dormant problem that suddenly struck him, and he was hospitalized. And they called me in because I had just submitted that script idea. Also, I had worked on Flash Gordon with my brother Dan, which you're probably aware of. And so they knew me. The editors knew me, and I was a familiar face there. So they called me in since they knew my work on Flash Gordon. They called me in and asked me to do a few weeks of temporarily of the dailies for Wilson McCoy. Unfortunately, he passed away about a week and a half after being in the hospital. And it was kind of fortunate for me, though, and they were considering about 3 other artists, maybe more, and they liked my work on it. And they had another guy, Bill Lignanti, doing the Sunday page. He was living in California. And he was doing the Sunday page, I was doing the dailies. And they called me in finally, and they said, well, we're having a legal problem. As soon as that's settled, we want you to do the daily on Sunday. And that was in August of 61 when they finally gave me the strip to sign. They gave me a contract to sign. But I started somewhere in the late spring, and it was just a year before David was born. David was born in 62, and this is a year before. Well, less than a year. And my wife was pregnant with David at the time. She was carrying him. So I just felt that David was a good omen for me. He brought me a lot of luck. And so I tried when I finally got the contract. I knew I didn't sign it yet because I tried to call home from New York, from Manhattan, and nobody was home. My wife was out shopping with the two older girls, and my mother-in-law wasn't home. We were living downstairs apartment at my mother-in-law's house, and she wasn't home. I couldn't let her know. I tried to reach my mother. She wasn't home. It was such a crazy thing where I couldn't finally reach the neighbor who we were good friends with, and she was so happy for the news. So I think I went into a bar and had a beer just to celebrate. I needed to celebrate with someone, so I bought the bartender a beer. So, but it was a real blessing when I got the Phantom, because as a kid, I looked at the Phantom and I said, someday I've got to do that strip, but I never thought it would happen. I said, someday I would love to do that strip and modernize it, perk it up a little. McCoy was doing it. I was in my teens then, and I said I would love to do it. I was going to an art high school at the time, and I was developing pretty well, and I knew I could draw fairly well. Of course, I was in competition with other artists. You know, nobody stood out. We were all pretty well, doing pretty well at drawing. So I just felt that someday that strip had to be improved, the artwork. Story was always a great story. I enjoyed the story, the legendary feature of it, you know, content of it. And the fact that he had no superpowers, that he was an average guy with a little stronger than how the natives felt about it, but everyone knew that it was just a legend. He didn't really live 400 years, you know. So, but I love this. I did love the strip. I always enjoyed that strip as a story. I just felt that it needed some improvement in the artwork. And that's what when I started out, that's what I vowed to do, to start to get my style and give it more character, more personality, more human interest in the expressions and everything. I gave the Phantom more expressions than his stone face. You know, he always had this one single expression, tight lips, and you know, you hardly just saw him laughing, either Ray Moore. I mean, just look through the work and see his expressions. There may be one or two angry expressions, but nothing of his other emotions of worry and I mean, when they showed him worry, he still had the stone face. When he was worried about Diana, there was no motion in the mask, no motion in the mouth. These things needed some upgrading and improvement. And I think that's what the people, even though they may not have recognized it, it appealed to them, because I did get more human interest into it. And of course, more blacks and more, you've seen that, my placement of blacks and more dramatic, giving it more of this mystique effect, you know, the 50s, 40s and 50s, you know, the wonderful gray and black and white tones that the photographers would get in the films. Well, that's what I wanted to get into Fantasma. So those were the points of interest I try to place into the strip.
You say you are responsible for modernizing the charts in many ways, and you being the artist present in some of his most important moments, the wedding, the born of the kids. What do you think was your biggest contribution to the Phantom?
I think well, first of all, probably in the financial area, all right, and in its popularity. When I started the strip, it had 500 papers. When I finished my career with it, it had 900 papers. It gained 400 papers in the time that I worked on it, which was amazing, pretty amazing. If you're selling 200 or 300 papers, you're doing very well. But to have 900 papers, it was extremely popular. Not here so much in the States, which is pretty amazing too, because it was the first costume character before Superman. It came out in 1936, and Superman started in 1938. And so it had that precedent attached to it. And I think the most important contribution that I felt I gave it was making it more dynamic, more mystique, mysterious looking, and introducing some of the drama that it didn't have before in the drawing itself. I mean, Lee would write the drama. I think if I had to compare Ray Moore to Wilson McCoy, I would say Ray Moore gave it more of the mystery look to it, and more of the blacks and drama into it. But I try to improve on that. I think that was my greatest contribution. And I think that's what people, some people might be able to analyze it enough to be able to recognize that it's more dramatic, more mysterious, and more realistic. And other people may not really find what attracts them to it, but I think it was those features that attracted people to it.
Great. Another question from Roberto, and also from Celso Nunes, another member of team, is about the process of creating the stories. We know you had assistants like André Leblanc, and we'd like to know what is the story path from script creation to work complete.
Oh, well, I get a script from Lee, first of all. And then I read the more interesting and more difficult parts of the script to get my reference material together, because he'll have the Phantom in different countries and at different sites, familiar sites, at his different homes too, all over the globe, you know. So I'll dig out my reference, and his tree. Sometimes I'll have the tree house or this cave, skull cave, and his many different rooms in his skull cave. And so I had to kind of redesign them to make them comfortable for me to be able to work with and look proper, look real in its presentation. So that's what I really went for, is the reality. But the process from going through the script, pulling out the reference material I needed, roughing it out, putting the pencil lettering in, leaving room for the balloons and the captions, and then starting to tighten up the pencils. Now, when I penciled it for myself, sometimes I would have someone ink it for me, and like LeBlanc would ink it for me, or Joe Giella worked with me many times. Do you know Joe Giella at all?
Yes. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yeah. He did Merryworth. He did Batman for a while. Yes, he was a very dear friend of mine. He was in my grade of school, and he went to school with me. He and there's another guy, Al Scaduto, who did They'll Do It Every Time. He did a gag strip. Very funny guy. But the three of us went to the same school, same class. And we were three maniacs in school. Really, we kidded around a lot. We got into trouble a lot too. But we all, strangely enough, all three of us worked. Our careers wound up with King Features. Of all of the areas of work that we got involved in, we all wound up working for the same corporation, which is pretty unusual for three friends growing up and then finally working for the same company. I mean, it's just too coincidental, but that's the way it worked. And then from the pencils, then I ink it with Indy ink and pen and brush, and then submit it. It's submitted to King Features. So they had an office in the city on 45th Street in Manhattan. And they had a staff of artists working, they called it a bullpen. They worked in a studio area, in a studio office. And they did the retouch on the artwork and changed some lettering here and there, and cleaned up the artwork here and there, or if the dialogue wasn't too clean, they would clean it up, it was a good company to work for, very good company.
Great. And
that's how I did an entire strip. Now for the Sunday was a little bit. Sunday, you were confined to a format of how the panels were placed, and you could only work within the limitations of the panels that they allow you to work in, the size that they allow you to work in. You could change the proportions of them, but there's certain areas where you can't go beyond, make a larger panel than what they allow you. So you had some constrictions on the Sunday page, but the daily you had more area to work in. There were usually 2 to 3 panels on a daily. On a Sunday, we had about 9 panels.
Great. And
when we were done with the Sunday, we would have to make a copy of the page and color in a photostat of the Sunday page. Color it in and give the color notations for the printer. So we had a lot of work. We had to do it from A to Z. You even work and work. You had to work within the scope of what the printer can do. You couldn't do halftones and things like that. They were not available in that printing process.
Interesting. And one more question. You are constantly cited by Phantom artists as an influence and inspiration. I talked with Jeff Weigel, and he talked a lot of you.
What's his name?
Jeff Weigel.
Oh, Weigel, yeah.
Weigel.
Right.
Which leads me to ask, which artists have you influenced you? Was your brother Dan Barry one of them?
Well, I guess part of my influence, because I worked on so much of his work, part of the influence had to be from Dan, because I had to work his style. That's the way he wanted me to either ink or draw his work, was to draw it in his style. So a lot of it had to do with Dan, but I also liked other artists. There was one particular artist whose style, and he's not familiar to you, his style was wonderful, and one of the best artists I've ever seen. His name was Lou Fine, and he did a family strip. In fact, there was a strip that was running that Stan Drake drew. That Stan Drake, Heart of Julia Jones. You ever hear that strip? The Heart of Julia Jones. It's a romance strip. Well,
I believe I don't know this.
But anyway, the artist who drew that strip was a tremendous artist, and his style was very much like this guy Luke Fine, who I admired. And he had a wonderful. He knew how to animate the figure and get wonderful expressions, and that's how I concentrated on getting expressions into people's faces. It wasn't just the Phantom, but I want to get real expressions in the characters that he deals with, you know, Diana and the kids and the villains, you know, serious expressions, humorous expressions, and whatever. And I tried to get more expressions in the hands. I tried to use the hands to get more character into the individual, you know. So these are the things I look for. I try to get into the script to give it a little more richness. Needed more richness to it. I didn't want it to be just an adventure strip. I wanted to have some character to it, some intimacy. You know, wanted you to learn to really like Diana and enjoy the kids. You know, and feel sad when Rex took over his kingdom. You know, I wanted to get those emotions in there, and I showed it in the characters' faces.
Did you keep following the Phantom stories?
I did for a while, but I began to become very disappointed in and how the artwork was changing. And also I found the stories being repeated. There were stories that I did 30 years before that were being repeated, and just different names of the characters, but very similar stories. And I just began to lose interest. He was getting on in age. He was probably about 90 or so, in his 90s, which I am, but I don't think I would lose to my memory is pretty sharp still. And I don't think I would leave some of the characters stranded on an island and never come back to the character again. You know, these are things he was doing. In fact, even when I was working on the Phantom, I had to remind him that you left John so-and-so on the island. Aren't you going to get back to him? He's got nobody there. Could be natives there that could eat him for dinner. You know, you got to get back to him. So he was kind of just beginning to lose it a little bit at that time. And his stories were dull. They weren't exciting anymore. They were just repeats, and they were just poor copies of what he did much earlier. His stuff earlier was brilliant. It was good stuff. He was a terrible egotist. Tried minimizing the work I did. Tried to put it, reducing my strength on the strip, my placement on the strip. Always diminishing my efforts on it, and spreading stories out around that I was his assistant, and that I was not as good as not as good as Ray Moore. I mean, he was a nasty asshole, really. He was really nasty, and I had a lot of trouble with him. But we worked well together as far as the work was concerned. So that's the story of Lee.
And what did you think about the 1996 movie, The Phantom, with Billy Zane?
Yeah, I thought that he tried his best to recreate the character, and I thought he did a pretty good job, pretty decent job. There was a little bit of satire in there, which was okay. That's good. A couple of light moments, you know. But I thought the story was weak, and it didn't hold together, and you kind of lost, because of all the things that were going on, you kind of lost the basis to the story, the nucleus to the story, you know. And when I look back at it after I saw the movie, I said, you know, they didn't really cover what the problem that the Phantom was supposed to solve. I mean, they had this crazy villain who shrieked all through the movie, and it had to do with these skulls, these 3 skulls or whatever they were. I mean, it was very convoluted. It didn't really follow stay on the on track as to where the story was going. It kind of skipped skipped everywhere. Now, Lee made some changes on the story. He didn't write the script, but he made some changes, and he approves most of it. But he tried to promote it as well as he could. But I don't think he was terribly happy with the story himself. Yeah, they could have done a better job, and I think it could have been more successful. It wasn't handled well.
Yes.
I mean, look at how well Batman went over, Superman went over, because they gave it they stayed with the nucleus of the story. They were out to stop the world from ending and things like that, and having a purpose, trying to catch the villain before something happens. And there was a time schedule on it. There was always something urgent that they had to take care of. You didn't feel it in this thing. I mean, who cared about three glorified skulls or whatever the hell they were? And it had no real serious threat to it. No, there was no threat going on. Really, it was too light. It needed more of a challenge to it. It wasn't there.
Yeah,
I
agree. I agree.
Yeah, right.
And my last question, and there are almost 200 stories of the Phantom with your artwork. It's a material so big, so important, beautiful, modern. You have an art that I don't know why I say this in English, but it's better along the time. Do you have a favorite story?
Yes.
Among yours?
Yes. One of them is the Jungle Patrol. My favorite story is the Jungle Patrol. I love the characters that he fought and created the Jungle Patrol. I love the sequences where he's fighting these pirates. You know, Redbeard, the pirate, and the other guy, the French guy, and the Asian guy, and there was a black guy, right? These 4 characters and a Frenchman too. He had a sword fight with a Frenchman, and but the best part was when he fought Redbeard. He took this giant down. You know, I enjoyed doing the action on it, and then the way he develops this uniform for them, and they carry on with this green uniform of theirs, almost very much like the Three Musketeers. So that was my favorite story, because and the Jungle Trolls still exist today in his stories.
It's a great story about hope and redemption. Eh?
It was wonderful story. It was one when Rex's grandfather dies and he has to take over the throne. He has to take over the kingdom. He's the next in line, and he's heartbroken to have to leave the Phantom and the two kids, Anna, and he doesn't want to leave. And the Phantom does such a beautiful job of encouraging him to face his responsibility and to keep his family line going. You know, it was very touching, and that's what I doing these what touching stories. You know, and I was always able to emote, make them very emotional. You know.
Mr. Sy Barry, thank you so much for your attention. It was a very special moment for me.
Oh, thank you. I'm always really tell of my experience and how I felt about the Phantom. It was a favorite of mine. Of all artworks and all, I worked 16 years in comic books before I got onto the Phantom. So years I worked, years of artwork, and I enjoyed it. I had some idiot editors, some pretty sick editors that I had to deal with. But I found my way to have a lot of respect for me. So because of the respect they have for me, they didn't give me as much tough time as they did others. So I was grateful for that. And I guess they had respect because I cared so much about my work, and I always wanted perfection in my work. And anyone that worked for me knew this, you know. So they had to turn out a good job for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Right, and stay well. I wanted to ask you: are you married? You have children?
I am married, and I have two children, two little girls. The youngest love the Phantom.
Oh, really?
Love the Phantom.
I'm sorry.
He have his own collection of comic books of the Phantom.
Oh my God! How old is he?
11.
11
years old. I have my collection, and she have her.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you for being such a beautiful fan. I really enjoy talking to you, and it's just wonderful to know that people still love this my artwork and still think of me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much.
So good. And stay well.
Stay well. Right. See you around.
See you around. I hope to talk to you again.